Did you ever wonder how a builder knows what he's going to make on a project before it's even completed? Let me teach you all the rules. I've used this exact strategy to build over 250 houses in the past 7 years, and it's helped me build the home start to finish, starting with almost no experience whatsoever. Let's get into it.
One of the first things that you need to know is, what am I planning to build? The best way that I do that is either hop on Redfin or Zillow and look at sold comparables. In other words, if I want to build a duplex, how much did it sell for? What's the size of the duplex? What's the size of the land? Then I can start to look for land. Here's a really quick tip. When you're looking to build a duplex and you find the value, you can pay up to 20% of that value for the land. In other words, now you know exactly what's your price range. If you're planning to build a $500,000 duplex, what can you pay for land? $100,000 max, including all of the utilities like sewer, water, and electrical. Those are the three main components for land. When you're underwriting the deal, you want to make sure that you do not pass this 20% mark, fully developed, ready to build. So the first step is to go and find land. Look for sold comparables, go 20%, and then you can start to look for different utilities. If you have public sewer, then what you're gonna wanna do is find out the location of the sewer, the depth, and the diameter of the sewer pipe. In other words, can my sewer system support the house that I'm gonna build? There is gonna be a table or a chart available at your local jurisdiction that says, hey, if you have 4 bedrooms or 4 bathrooms, you need a minimum 4-inch sewer pipe or lateral. If you're going to do a private sewer system, in other words, a septic system, you're gonna need to make sure of 2 things. That the lot is big enough to accept your septic system. Number 2, that the soil is good enough. In other words, you're gonna need a perk test to make sure that the sewer system works. And then you can move forward and decide between sewer or septic, depending on what's available to you. Next, you're gonna have to decide power. If you're going to do city power, is it overhead or is it underground? And is there going to be any kind of additional piping or wiring or transformers that you need to add so that you can add that into your budget and make sure that you can afford it inside of your construction budget? And then last but not least, water. Are you going to use public or private water? Public is going to be a water lateral in the street, however many feet away. Depending on the distance away that your home is from the water line, that's going to determine the cost of it. If it's a private water system, you're gonna have to get a quote to drill for a well, get a test done if there is even a water table low enough, and then you'll be able to get the water from that water well. So those are the different things to look out for when you're looking for land, but let's get into detail in step 2, which is underwriting, which is the best part.
Cool, so step 2 is gonna be underwriting a deal. Number 1, you have to know what you're going to build. That way you can work backwards and reverse engineer your deal. Once you have your after build value or ARV, let's just say we're building a $500,000 house, we can multiply that by 20% and that gets us a total land cost of $100K. So land is one of the pieces of the puzzle, right? The after build value is a second piece of the puzzle, 2 out of 3. The last thing is we've seen a national average of $150 per square foot to actually build the house. That's your third piece of the puzzle. And then last but not least, if you have a 20% margin left over on the deal to make your profit, that's all the information you're going to need for underwriting. Step number 3 is going to be plans and design. One of the best pieces of advice that I can give you for plans and design is use what already works. In other words, if you see new construction being built in your area, you're running the comparables and you see that, whoa, a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath unit is going pending within 7 days, you know that's a desired product in your area, and you should make your building plan similar to that. What's the first step inside of plans and design? Once you've identified your product, you can work with a drafter to draw up your plan set, and depending on your jurisdiction, that drafter would then pass that building plan on to a structural engineer. The engineer would add in all of the different details, amounts of rebar, size of footings, foundation, all those different details, shear wall schedules, and then he would give it back to the architect or the drafter. The architect would prepare a full submittal that would include the site plan, the energy calculations, the floor plans, the structural plans, and then you could send it off to either trusses or floor joists, depending on your style of build. And once you have that full submittal package, you can submit it to the city. Once you have your approvals, you can then move on to the next step.
The next step is going to be submitting your entire full building plan set to the city or the county or your local jurisdiction for approval. And honestly, it's just going to look like a bunch of files just like this. In some jurisdictions, you bring in paper copies and then they mark it up with red ink. Other places, you upload PDF files. What is that going to look like? Well, typically it's going to have like a structural calculation sheet. So the engineer did all their calculations right here, and you're going to submit those for your building. Then you're going to have different things like your truss drawings and truss layout. You're going to have different things like your plot plan. So this is your site plan. How does the unit sit on the actual legal tax parcel? How do you get this? Number one, you get a surveyor to come out, and they basically use GPS locates, put it on a PDF. They give it to the architect. The architect can then take their drawn plans and place it onto the plot plan. You're going to have, just like you had the structural calculations for the building, if you're using manufactured trusses like we are here, you're going to have engineered truss drawings for every single truss. Then you're going to have, depending on your local jurisdiction, your stormwater application, and then any kind of beam calculations. So all of that will be provided by your professionals. That's the best part about this game. I'm not a licensed engineer. I don't have to be a licensed developer. All I need to do is hire the right professional, and I can pay for that experience and get a bunch of these files back in place. My job as a builder or as a putting the deal together is to get a checklist from the city and literally go through line item by line item and make sure that I submit it. Once everything is fully submitted, usually there's a $100 to $500 intake fee for the city to start reviewing it. They'll review it. They're gonna mark up your plans, whether digitally or in person with red ink, and they'll give it back to you with a list of corrections. Hey, why does the engineer say here that the footing size is here, but it doesn't match the plan here? You're gonna have maybe 5, 10, 20 different corrections like this, and you're gonna have to go through and fix it. Guess what I do? I pass on that comment to the engineer. Mr. Engineer or Mrs. Engineer, could you please fix this? They make the corrections, they send it back to me. Why does the site plan show that the setback on this side of the building is 4.5 feet when the minimum setback's 5 feet? Oh, architect, could you please move the building over 6 inches to make it match? And you're gonna go through line item by line item through that check sheet or correction list or what you wanna call it. And you are ultimately a master coordinator. You take the corrections from the city and you give it to the correct party. Once they have it back to you, you'll resubmit it to the city. And oftentimes this cycle can go on, depending on your area, anywhere from 1 day, like St. John's, Indiana, where you can get permits over the counter, or sometimes 12 months if you're maybe in San Diego, California. And you're gonna go back and forth until you get your final approved stamp sheet. And then what they're gonna do is really cool. They're gonna give you an approved residential inspection card. You have approved permits. You pay your building permits and you're off to the races. Your next step is gonna be financing. Now that you have approved permits in hand, it's time to get the financing in place and start building.
All right, step 5 is going to be financing. One of the first things you're gonna have to do is, let's just say that your price per square foot was $150 per square foot. You're gonna need to break that down into line items. In other words, how much will foundation cost? How much will framing cost? How much will plumbing cost? And you break that down into an itemized list. This is gonna help the lender see and understand that cost budget. If you're hiring a GC, he can actually give this to you and you don't have to do this. Next is gonna be your pro forma that you created in step number 2. It's gonna help the lender see, oh, this is what the project's going to make. And then you're gonna need to request a term sheet. The term sheet will include the rate, the loan term, and the points that you're going to pay. Whether it's going to be a hard money, private money, or construction to perm loan, you're gonna wanna know these things so that you know the cost of capital. This is very important to factor into the profit. And then last but not least, you're gonna need an appraisal, and the appraisal is going to basically predict the future value of the home based on sold comparables. So just like we found the ABV ourselves here in step 2, now you're gonna get it verified third party before you close on the loan.
Step 6 is gonna be construction. If you've never built new construction before, I would definitely tell you to hire a qualified new construction builder to build out your project for a cost plus, usually a fee of 10%. In other words, if your project costs $500,000 and you charge a 10% fee on that, the builder will charge you $50,000 to complete your entire build. When you're underwriting the deal, this has to make sense from step 2. In other words, you don't need a license, but you can pay and have a builder manage the entire schedule for you start to finish. If you were to manage the entire construction process yourself and you wanted to take on this challenge, you definitely could, but I would strongly recommend that you have some kind of construction schedule to follow, a good list of subcontractors so that you don't have to guess. Never pay a deposit to a subcontractor until the project is complete, because the subs have the most motivation to finish the job on time, on schedule, on budget. And then when you're working with your subcontractors, schedule, scope, and budget is the most important thing. Make sure that they're following the schedule, and what happens if they don't. Make sure they are meeting your budget that you guys agreed on beforehand, and what happens if you go under or over. Are there bonuses? Are there penalties? And then lastly, the scope. Are they completing what they said they would per the approved plans, for example? That's very important in the construction space. The most important thing that I would tell somebody that's managing a construction project the very first time, every house, every single day, someone has to be on site besides weekends. In other words, if the site is empty on a Monday through a Friday, then you are losing a lot of interest money, because if that stacks up over the course of a 6-month project, you can lose $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 just in interest payments alone because somebody wasn't on site. What does that tell you? You just need to be responsible, plan ahead, and schedule people ahead of time, get material on site ahead of time. That's the most important thing in the construction process. But the best thing is, if you hire a qualified builder for a 10% fee, you're not gonna have this challenge, and this part of the puzzle piece will be solved for you. So let's move on to step 7, which is gonna be selling the home. Step 7 is gonna be either moving into the home or selling it. If you decide to move in, just know that you can get up to $250,000 of capital gains taxes completely waived if you live there for at least 2 years out of the last 5, and up to $500,000 if you're married. If you decide to sell it right away, just make sure to factor in that when it comes time for tax season around April, you're gonna owe capital gains tax on the profit that you made. So prepare for that, because that money doesn't come out of the sale, it comes out of your bank account later on when you file taxes. That's it for this 7-step video. We're helping people across the nation build their very first house start to finish, or those that have built more than one house in the past, and we're teaching them how to scale their new construction business. If that's you, click that link below to see if you qualify to work with me and my team and help expedite success in the real estate new construction journey. Make less mistakes like going over budget, getting the wrong subs, getting the wrong deal, underwriting, finding the right deal. We can help you with all of it. Click that link below.